Let's start with a question. Take a look at your phone, your credit card, or your banking app right now. You're standing at the edge of a multi-trillion-dollar system. Central banks, interest rates, bonds, collateral, leveraged financing, all of these abstract concepts form an invisible web wrapped around you. Now, let me ask you something. Do you actually know who built this system? The answer isn't England, not America, not the Netherlands either. If you want the real answer, you need to take your mind back 800 years to the foggy shores of the Adriatic. To a handful of islands squeezed between mud and salt. Go back to the year 1000. The world's greatest cities are Constantinople, Baghdad, and Cairo. Europe, meanwhile, is a continent still barely crawling out of the Dark Ages, almost entirely trapped in an agricultural economy. And at the far edge of that continent, on a swamp where nobody would have predicted a great future, a small city is growing fast. Venice. Back then, nobody could have guessed that this city would control 30% of world trade 300 years later, establish the world's first public bank 400 years later, or become the birthplace of the double-entry bookkeeping system we still use 500 years later. But that's exactly what happened. This is the story of an empire, written not with swords but with pens, not with blood but with ink, not with armies but with ledgers. And without knowing this story, it's impossible to understand the financial world we live in today. Let's begin. But first, you can support us by subscribing to the channel. Your comments help shape what we cover in future videos. And most importantly, if you like the video, it motivates us to keep going and take on new projects. Now the miracle begins. Impossibility is the mother of creativity. Venice's invisible empire. The dark and mysterious origins of modern banking. Chapter I. The miracle of the lagoon. Being landless is a weapon. In 452 AD, the footsteps of Attila's Huns shook northern Italy to its core. Roman refugees fled for their lives to the sea, to the swamps, to the mud. The city of Aquileia had been leveled. People who couldn't hide behind walls were looking for a different kind of protection, being unreachable. And they found the lagoon. In the north of the Adriatic, in the middle of a shallow, saltwater inland sea, small islands were scattered around. What started as a temporary shelter became a permanent home. Wooden stakes were driven into the mud. Stone was laid on top of them, and a city was born. This city's greatest advantage was, paradoxically, its greatest disadvantage. It had no land. Empires on land are built on soil. Farming generates income, animals carry loads, trees build houses. But Venice had neither farmland nor forests. It had to buy even its timber. It pulled salt from the sea, bought its grain, imported its meat. That vulnerability forced the Venetians to create something ingenious out of necessity. If nature won't feed you, trade will. At the start of the 11th century, Venice struck a special deal with the Byzantine Empire. Through the Golden Bull signed in 1082, merchants in Constantinople granted Venetians unmatched privileges, duty-free trade, private neighborhoods, immunity from local courts. These were rights that even Byzantine merchants didn't have. Venice would have free access to every port in the empire, in exchange for harbor fees and military support. This was the world's first structural trade agreement, a deal built not on a single fleet winning, but on an entire system winning. And Venice understood what that agreement was worth. Power was no longer just physical, it was now institutional. Chapter 2. The system born beneath the Rialto. When you come to Venice, the Piazza San Marco pulls you in. But that wasn't where the city's real heart beat. The real heart was beating across the bridge. Under the stone arches of the Rialto, long wooden tables were set up. The men who sat behind those tables were called banchieri, from the Italian banco, meaning table. That's where the word bank comes from. Much later, when a bancier went broke, the Venetian state would smash his table, bancorato, broken table. That's where the English word bankrupt comes from. Words tell a whole era's story. From the first half of the 13th century, we have written records documenting these counters. Venetian and foreign merchants would open accounts with the city's leading bankers. The system was incredibly simple and incredibly revolutionary. A merchant would walk in and give a verbal order to a clerk. Transfer this amount from that account to this one. If the other party also had an account at the same bank, the transaction happened instantly. No money changed hands. No gold was moved. A single line in the ledger just changed. For the first time in history, abstract money had arrived. To grasp how big a deal that was, you have to picture what life was actually like back then. In that era, carrying money meant risking your life. Roads were full of bandits. Seas were full of pirates. If a merchant wanted to move gold from Venice to Constantinople, he had to fight off robbers, storms, and the ship itself for hundreds of miles. In a very real sense, the money could just disappear. But a number can't disappear. A number doesn't sink to the bottom of the sea. A number can't be robbed from a caravan. A number stays put in a ledger in Venice and shows up again in another ledger somewhere else. The Venetians figured this out, and they turned that insight. Chapter 3. The Colaganza, the world's first venture capital. But keeping ledgers wasn't enough. Making money meant taking risks. And in that era, the biggest risk was overseas trade. Venice came up with a solution for that too. Picture it like this. There's a wealthy older merchant. He wants to go buy spices in the Levant, but his age and health just can't handle long sea voyages anymore. On the other side, there's a young, strong, fearless merchant. He's got no problem sailing to the ends of the earth, but he's completely broke. The Colaganza brings these two together. The wealthy merchant puts in the capital, the young merchant puts in the labor and takes on the risk. The profits are split in the typical arrangement. 30% to the traveling partner, 70% to the one who put up the money. But here's the really critical part. If the ship sinks, if it gets attacked, if the cargo spoils, the wealthy merchant loses his money. But the young merchant is not held responsible for the debt. He doesn't pay with his life. This was limited liability, the very core of what we call limited liability today. This is the underlying logic of the modern corporation, of stocks, of investment funds. Cap the downside, because only then will people dare to take risks. Only then does capital flow. Only then does the economy grow. Venice figured this out in the 12th century. The Colaganza had another brilliant dimension: risk distribution. A wealthy Venetian merchant could have 5 different Colaganzi going with 5 different young merchants at the same time. Even if one ship went down, the profits from the other 4 voyages covered the loss. This was modern portfolio management, investment diversification in its purest form. Every fund manager on Wall Street is, without realizing it, working in the shadow of that old Venetian merchant at the Rialto. Chapter 4. The Gold Ducat, the dollar of its time. When you think of money, you probably think paper, right? But in the Middle Ages, the idea of paper money hadn't even landed in Europe yet. Real money was gold, and the quality, purity, and weight of gold varied everywhere. Venice had a solution for that too. On October 31st, 1284, during the reign of Doge Giovanni Dandolo I, Ducato d'Oro, the gold ducat, was minted. This coin weighed 3.545 grams and was 99.47% pure gold. That was the highest purity achievable by medieval metallurgy at the time. It featured an image of Christ among the stars and St. Mark handing a banner to the Doge. A Latin inscription read, Sit tibi Christatum, came to haesius isti ducatus. We dedicate this realm to you, O Christ, you who rule this But the ducat's importance wasn't theological, it was economic. From 1284 to 1797, when Napoleon seized Venice, this coin was minted at the exact same weight and purity for 513 straight years, spanning 83 different doges. That kind of monetary consistency was something the world had never seen before. The Egyptian Mamluks copied it. The Ottoman gold coinage was calibrated against it. Spain used the Venetian ducat as its reference point for its major currency reform. It circulated in India. Merchants in Indonesia knew it. The Venetian ducat was the reserve currency of its era, the 15th century equivalent of today's US dollar. Think about it. Spain, the country that financed Columbus's voyage, used the Venetian ducat as its monetary standard when reorganizing its currency system. Spain was about to discover new continents, but the man who discovered them was sailing with an accounting system borrowed from the old one. Chapter V. The Arsenal and Assembly Line. 400 years before Henry Ford, money and trade weren't enough. Venice needed ships to dominate the seas, and it was producing those ships in the most efficient way the world had ever seen up to that point. On the eastern edge of Venice, surrounded by high walls and laced with canals, a massive complex stretched out the Arsenal. Today, the word arsenal has made it into English as a place to store weapons, but the original comes from Arabic dar asipa, meaning workshop, a word that came to Venice through trade with the Arab world. By the early 1500s, the arsenal was the largest industrial facility in Europe. 16,000 people worked there, and those workers were running the same system Henry Ford would invent 400 years later. Ships moved through a line. At each station, a different crew installed standardized parts, masts, sails, ropes, weapons. A half-finished ship leaving one station rolled into the next. The workers might not even know each other, everyone just did their section. The result, the arsenal could produce one fully equipped warship per day. In 1571, before the massive Battle of Lepanto against the Ottoman Navy, Venice urgently needed ships fast. The arsenal took the order and delivered. Dante Alighieri wrote about this remarkable system in the Inferno section of the Divine Comedy, a scene of a vast factory where buoyantar is being applied to dozens of ships at once. The greatest poet of the Middle Ages had immortalized the greatest industrial facility of his era. The arsenal had one more secret. It was a state secret. Workers at this facility, off limits to outsiders, swore oaths of secrecy. Ship designs, construction techniques, material formulas, all tightly guarded. Venice had built one of the world's first corporate security systems to keep its military technology away from rivals. The Industrial Revolution exploded in England 300 years later, but the spark had been struck in the 13th century on the Adriatic shore, at the edge of the saltwater. Chapter V. The Blind Man's Game. Enrico Dandolo and the greatest financial coup in history. The year is 1202. A Crusader army has gathered in Venice. The goal, liberate the Holy Land. But there's no money. The Crusader leaders came to Venice with a proposition. Build us ships, and we'll fight the Muslims. Venice agreed. The deal was struck for 85,000 silver marks. Venice would build a massive fleet to transport 33,500 soldiers and 4,500 horses, but the plans fell apart. The soldiers expected from across Europe never showed. Many had set sail from other ports. The army that reached Venice was a third of what was expected, and the money they could pay was only half the agreed amount. Venice had halted its normal trade for an entire year and poured everything into building this fleet. Now it was on the verge of bankruptcy. This is exactly when Venice's 41st Doge stepped in. His name was Enrico Dandolo. He was past 90 years old, completely blind, but his mind was sharper than any statesman of that era. Dandolo made the Crusaders a new offer. Wipe out your debt, he said. In exchange, do what I ask. The request was simple. The city of Zara on the Adriatic coast had revolted against Venice. The Crusader army would take it. The devout Crusaders hesitated. Zara was Christian. Would a Christian army attack another Christian city? Dandolo paid no attention to their hesitation. Zara was taken, but the real move hadn't come yet. A Byzantine prince in exile approached Venice, looking to reclaim the throne of Constantinople. The reward seemed attractive. Byzantine financial and military support for the Crusaders, the unification of the churches. Dandolo calculated this instantly. Byzantium was Venice's biggest commercial rival. Decades earlier, Venetians in Constantinople had been massacred and their property confiscated. Dandolo remembered all of it, and with those blind eyes, he saw the greatest financial coup in history. In 1204, the Crusader army attacked Constantinople instead of its intended target, Jerusalem. The largest and wealthiest Christian city in the world at that moment was looted by Christian soldiers. Temples, palaces, libraries, treasuries, everything was plundered. When they finally sat down at the table, what was Venice's share? 3/8 of Constantinople, almost half. control of the islands in the Aegean, Crete ports along critical trade routes, and the heart of Byzantine commerce, Venice's own quarter in the city. This was a moment of blindness, not physical, historical. The world lived through a power shift without even realizing it was happening. The Crusaders thought they were fighting for God, but in reality, they were working for Venice. Dandolo died in Constantinople. He was buried in the Hagia Sophia, in enemy territory, in the most sacred space of the city he had conquered. A blind man laid to rest where he had struck. Chapter 7. Double-entry bookkeeping, a tool that belongs to reality. Beneath all this trade and wealth, there was an invisible but powerful tool, accounting. Medieval merchants kept records. But how? Did I make a profit or take a loss? What's my business actually worth? Can I see all my debts clearly? There was no system that gave satisfying answers to these questions until Venetian merchants developed a new approach, double-entry bookkeeping. Every transaction affected two accounts, one credit, one debit. Where did the money come from? Where did it go? These two columns had to balance. If they didn't, something was wrong. The system checked itself. In the mid-15th century, a small Franciscan friar came to Venice, Luca Pacioli, a mathematician, a close friend of Leonardo da Vinci. They shared a home for a time. Pacioli came to Venice to tutor the children of a merchant family. And there, he saw the accounting system that Rialto's merchants had been using for centuries. He was blown away. In 1494, he included that system in full detail, with comprehensive examples in a book, Summa de Arithmetica. That book became the business Bible of Europe for centuries. It's considered one of the most influential publications of the Renaissance. But well before Pacioli's book, we have Florentine bankers' ledgers from 1211 still in existence today. The system's roots go even further back to 12th century northern Italy. And Venice was the city that developed it to its most sophisticated form. Why did it matter so much? It made something possible that had never been possible before. A merchant could finally see the true value of his business. Not just the gold in the safe, but receivables, debts, assets, liabilities. The full picture on a single page. This was capitalism's actual birth certificate. Today, the balance sheets of Google, Amazon, and HSBC are built on the same logic, with minor variations. John Maynard Keynes used this system to develop the concept of GDP, a way to measure a nation's wealth. Modern national accounting came out of those Venetian merchants' wooden tables. And maybe the most ironic truth of all, the Enron scandal, the Lehman Brothers collapse. The 2008 financial crisis at the root of every one of these disasters was either a bypass or a distortion of double-entry bookkeeping. The 21st century crises that affected millions of people came from the modern-day abuse of a system born in Venice 800 years ago. Chapter 8. The Church and Interest Dancing with God. The Venetians had a big problem: sin. Medieval Christianity explicitly banned interest, meaning earning profit from lending money. This practice, called usury, was a mortal sin under church law. You have to work to make money. Earning money in your sleep was against God's commandments. But Venice couldn't give this up. Trade requires credit. Credit requires interest. No interest, the system collapses. The solution: change what you call it. Venetian bankers developed creative terminology. Instead of interest, they called it exchange rate differences. Instead of lending, they called it joint ventures. Instead of interest, income, they called it risk compensation. They skillfully exploited the blind spots in church law. But this game didn't always work. The church kept up the pressure. And at this point, Venice made its craftiest move yet. Jewish communities. Jewish religious law prohibited Jews from charging interest among themselves, but permitted charging interest to non-Jews. Christian law was exactly the opposite. This asymmetry was a business opportunity. Venice drew Jewish bankers into a designated area. The Ghetto Nuovo became the world's first ghetto. The word comes from the Venetian ghetto, meaning foundry, because a foundry used to operate in that area before it became the Jewish neighborhood. These communities handled the financial transactions that Venetian Christians couldn't do openly. On one hand, Jews gained a degree of economic power through this arrangement. On the other, Venice was somewhat shielded from the church's wrath. Then in 1508, a critical moment arrived. Every private bank in Venice collapsed one after another. Only one banker was still standing, Asher Meshulam, known as Anselmo del Banco. A Jewish banker held Venice's entire financial system upright on his own. It was the most striking symbol of the tension between money and morality. A Christian city was breathing by leaning on a Jewish banker's back. Chapter IX, the Council of Ten, the world's first intelligence service. There was another system protecting Venice's financial power, the Consiglio dei Dieci, the Council of Ten. It was established in 1310 to put down a coup attempt. It was meant to be temporary, but it became permanent. And over time, it grew into the most powerful institution in the Venetian state. What did the Council of Ten do? The official answer, state security. The real answer, everything. Those stone lion-mouthed boxers around Venice tourists today find them charming and snap photos. But their real function was something else entirely. Anonymous tip letters dropped into these boxes were forwarded to the Council of Ten. Citizens could leave any kind of accusation, bribery, treason, espionage, corruption in those slots. Through this, Venice had its own citizens surveilling each other. But the truly spectacular part was the external intelligence operation. Venetian ambassadors sent to other countries weren't just diplomatic representatives, they were primary intelligence agents. Every ambassador was required to submit a detailed report upon return. The economy of the country they visited, its military strength, the ruler's character, palace intrigues, trade opportunities, and threats. These reports were stored in the Venetian state archives. Some can still be read today, and they're remarkably comprehensive, almost like a modern CIA analysis. On top of that, the Council of Ten kept paid informants from all layers of society: nobles, gondoliers, servants, hotel owners, bakers, what foreign merchants were saying, who foreign ambassadors were meeting. Everything was noted, and for those who leaked critical trade secrets, the penalty was death. In 1539, when the Ottomans threatened Cyprus and the Portuguese were searching for new spice routes, putting Venice at serious risk, the Council of Ten established the Inquisitors against the disclosure of state secrets. This three-person panel had the authority to try and execute anyone suspected of treason. In secret, the CIA, MI6 Mossad, all modern intelligence agencies. Their proto-version was operating in Venice in the 16th century. Chapter X, Banco di Rialto, the birth of state banking. By the late 16th century, Venice's private banking sector was collapsing. A string of bankruptcies had shaken public confidence in the market. The last private bank, the Pisani Tepolo House, went under in 1584. Who was going to save banking? There were no other private banks left. Investors weren't willing to step in. So the Venetian Senate created one of history's turning points. The state would start its own bank. On April 11, 1587, by Senate decree, the Banco della Piazza di Rialto was established. It was Venice's first public bank, state-guaranteed, state-supervised, and it did what private banks couldn't. It guaranteed that it would be trustworthy. This bank didn't function like today's central banks. It held accounts for merchants who deposited gold and silver coins. It processed transfers between those accounts without physically moving money. Then in 1593, a new law came down. All bills of exchange had to be settled through this bank. Venice's commercial world was now flowing through a single channel. In 1619, the Banco del Giro was established. This was a more sophisticated arrangement. It created accounts backed by government bonds. Citizens became partners in state debt, and that debt could be transferred like money. Government debt, in a sense, became money. This was the core of modern central banking. The Amsterdam Bank opened in 1609, largely copying the Venetian model. The Bank of England in 1694. The Federal Reserve in 1913. From one to the next, each generation inherited the legacy of the last. And at the head of all of it, those wooden tables under the Rialto Bridge. Chapter She, the fall, every empire ends. Venice's invisible empire wasn't eternal. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottomans. This meant the collapse of Venice's foothold in Eastern trade. Treaties were struck with the Ottomans at times, wars were fought at other times, but the balance had shifted. The bigger blow came in 1498. Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa and reached India. This was a brand new trade route for spices, one that cut out the Mediterranean, Venice, and the Ottomans entirely. The foundation of Venice's monopoly was geography, and now geography had changed. Over the next 2 centuries, Venice declined, but it was a slow, dignified, and remarkable retreat. The city was still wealthy, still beautiful, still sophisticated. But Venice was no longer the one shaping the world. 1797, as Napoleon's armies swept through Italy, they reached Venice's gates. The 1,000-year-old republic surrendered without a fight. The last doge stepped down from his crown and his robes. The Serenissima, the most serene republic, was over. Napoleon immediately began tearing down the arsenal. Centuries of ship designs, documents, archives, some destroyed. The city became part of Austria for a long time, and then of the newly unified Italy. But no one could destroy the legacy. Chapter 12. The legacy, what is invisible, lives on. Today, Venice is sinking. Climate change is eating away at that ancient lagoon. Piece by piece, Acqua Alta high water is no longer a seasonal event. It's nearly chronic. Water rising to your knees in Piazza San Marco looks like a metaphor for Venice's fate. Built on water, sinking into water. But let's ask, how deep did this city's legacy actually take root? Press your debit card. A number changed in your account. No money moved, just an entry was updated. That right there is a 13th century Venetian invention. Do you have a credit card that charges interest? The conceptual foundation of that interest was built on the dance Venetian bankers performed with the church. Have you ever bought stock? Limited liability. The idea that you can't lose more than your shares are worth comes from the Caliganza. Have you ever invested in one company and another at the same time? Portfolio diversification was born from the Venetian practice of holding multiple coliganzi simultaneously. Government bonds, central banking, bills of exchange, double-entry bookkeeping, maritime insurance, bank wire transfers, all of these are products of Venice's invisible empire. And maybe the greatest legacy of all is this: the relationship between the state and the market. Venice was one of the first states to seriously think about when government should step into the economy, when it should step back, how it should regulate, and how it should guarantee the banking system. In 1374, a committee drafted a report on the idea of a public bank. It took them another 200 years to act on it, but they were the first ones to think it through. This deep institutional intelligence, how do you design a system? How do you sustain it? How do you oversee it? Was Venice's real secret. Not just wealth, but the structure that made wealth possible. Conclusion: the world that started on a wooden table. Now, let's go back to the beginning. That swamp, those stakes, those refugee fugitives. When they built a city on water, they built themselves too. They turned the helplessness of their geography into a weapon. They converted their landlessness into abstract wealth. They got around the church's prohibitions through terminological acrobatics. They outmaneuvered rivals through both trade agreements and intelligence networks. And in doing all of this, knowingly or not, they created the world we live in today. If you wake up in the morning and read financial news, track inflation data, follow the crypto debate, it's all built on the same questions. What is money? What is value? How do you build trust? How do you manage risk? The people who first asked and answered those questions systematically were sitting in the 12th century, behind long wooden tables under the stone arches of the Rio. Venice today is a museum city. Tourists take photos, ride gondolas, buy glassed work. But as you walk through those narrow streets, imagine this every once in a while. Behind those door knockers, decisions that changed the fate of the world were once being made. Along those canals, one merchant said to another, "I trust you." And that trust, over time, became an institution. The institution became a system. The system became the world. Pax tibi Marseille, Evangelista Mills, peace be with you. Mark, my evangelist. Venice's lion roared these words for centuries. But the real gospel was written not with a sword, but with a pen. And at the tip of that pen, the entire banking system of the modern world is resting. No land, no forests, and yet, through ingenious solutions that shaped the course of trade, the systems they built centuries ago are still running today. If you watched the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And how do you think this system could be improved? Drop your ideas in the comments. For sources and more, for anyone who wants to dig deep into medieval Venetian financial history, I'd recommend Frederick Lane's Venice, A Maritime Republic, and Jane Gleason White's Double Entry, How the Merchants of Venice Created Modern Finance. Iona Iordnews, Venice's Secret Service, published by Oxford, gives a thorough look at the intelligence side of things.